Hey everyone, let's talk about the scapula in weightlifting. So what's going on with it? How are we getting our scapula set? We have Aaron here, and what we're going to talk about first off with any athlete is helping them understand how to tighten their back, and that lies the foundation for how this sits and what's going on with the scapula. So without getting technical, without using any of the names of the muscles or anything else, for any coach out there, for any athlete out there, all we want you to think about is taking your scapula and pulling them down, right? This is going to tighten the area, kind of the erectors in the mid-back, and then also down your lats. What we want to not do is we don't want to pinch them together. See how Aaron's just squeezing them together? And this is often what I see with athletes do when they think about tightening their scapulas. They want to squeeze them together, and that's not what we want to do. Sometimes you have such an extreme case, they kind of get up here into a shrug too, trying to tighten everything up. So it's not. If we showed from the front, another way to see this is if Aaron pulls down his scapula, it kind of puffs up his chest. So if I'm set and I go to get tight, it kind of puffs up my chest as I pull down. How do you feel your lats? How do you feel this position to know you're in a good spot? One way to do it is if you're standing, just reach down like you're trying to pick something up with a floor without letting yourself bend. You'll feel that lat fire. The other way you can do it is if I took Aaron, I'm going to have him set, I'm going to push on his hand and have him fight my pressure so he feels the lat tighten. But remember, we don't want to be pulling the hand back. We're just not letting the arm go forward. That's the tightness that we want. So when we get set, what to have a new athlete do, what to have yourself do, one of the easiest ways to get a good back position right at the start is to have the athlete tighten like we just showed him, and then have him break at the hip and knee and sit to the bar. What you see Aaron did not do was he did not bend at the waist and then grab the bar and then come down. If you're a seasoned weightlifter, if you understand where your start position is and you understand how to tighten your back, you don't have a lot of funk going on back there at your mobility, you could grab the bar and get into your position by all means. But if you're brand new, give yourself the little bit of help to get your back set already and then come down to the bar, and you'll be in a better position each and every time as you develop your technique. So let's talk about the overhead position real quick. What's the scapulas doing on up there? So Aaron's got the bar overhead. He gets into a good wrist back position. Here, his scapulas are flat. He's not active. He's not shrugging. He's not getting all up in here. He's just lying flat. What I want to do is spin Aaron towards you, and if he weren't wrist lied back, he would be wrist straight. This immediately gets the weight into the muscles, right? So if we hit Aaron with a heavy weight here, it's much more likely for him to get a little bit of a bend and then have to press than if he were to lie that wrist back. Now his wrist is bone on bone, as we call it, his elbow bone on bone and locked down into his shoulder. Think about gymnasts when they do the pommel horse. When they lie their wrist back, they're supporting their entire body weight with their bone structure, not their muscles. So keep that in mind. That's why we talk about that. Other thing I just want to mention when we talk about lying wrist back, with new athletes, what I hear most often or see most often is they want to then stretch the bar too far back behind them, thus creating a lot of pressure in the anterior side of the shoulder on that delt. Pull them back. That arm should be just behind the ear rather than stretching it all the way back. You're just lying your wrist back, not stretching the whole thing back. So what we're going to go into now is we're going to talk from a mobility standpoint of all these little muscles around here, how to help them open up, what common things we see with new athletes that are preventing them to get there and how to fix that. But remember, we want to be bone on bone. We don't want to be shrugging, activating all these little muscles. If a big weight hit Aaron right now, boom, all these little muscles would get pushed around because they're not strong enough to support double body weight, not strong enough to support body weight, not strong enough to support a big weight receiving overhead dynamically. Keep that in mind, and let's move on to the next spot.
So we just talked about where we want the shoulders to lay. So now we're going to kind of take a flip-flop side of that, and we're going to talk about how to get athletes into those positions. There's a lot that goes into mobility as far as being able to get into the position, being able to have the strength to hold the position, having the stability in that, and then also the motor movement or the motor control to get that done. We're just going to touch briefly on a couple of things that will help you guys out. So we'll start first with the setup position. So as we mentioned earlier, we're looking to have Drew with his arms down, and he's pulling that scap down and in, right? So he's trying to get that flat back position through here. Well, a lot of times you're going to have athletes that are real junked up in the front. So they've got pec minors tight, biceps tendons tight, tight anterior delts, everything that's just kind of pulling and hunching them forward. So if this is all really, really short and tight, it doesn't matter if I understand how to pull the lat back. If I try to pull it back and it won't because I'm restricted here, that becomes a pretty big issue. So we're going to show you guys a stretch that we use after the majority of our lifting sessions as far as getting this back into a position to open up that essentially internal range of motion in that setup position. So Drew's going to put his arm through the band. If you notice, we have the band just wrapped around a rig. It can be wrapped around a relatively sturdy squat rack, whatever you guys want to do as far as that goes. The same arm that he's got the band wrapped around that's on the inside of the delt, he's going to put the hand behind his back, and he's going internal range of motion. So if he rotates for 2 seconds just to show, his palm's flat on his back, elbow bent, palm facing out. What he's also going to do, you'll notice, is he's going to reach around the back, he's going to cup the bottom of his hand, and he'll be able to use that for a little additional pressure when we get to that point. Now if he rotates back through, make sure the band's positioned where we're at, Drew's going to walk out, all right, to create that tension on the band. He's got that palm back. A couple of things we're looking for. First and foremost, what the main idea of this is simply to get this shoulder to sit back. So if he's really, 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 really tight and he can't get out of that position, pulling the head to the side, pulling the arm across the body, none of that stuff matters right now. What we need first is just to get this shoulder to lay back properly. So he focuses, he gets that shoulder to lay back where it's at. If he can get into a decent position and he wants to enhance that, he can start tying the head in. That's going to stretch out everything through the trap. You get a couple of the upper ribs, things like that. And then if he needs even more pressure, he's going to take that hand and he's going to pull it slightly across his back. Okay, so really, really good stretch. I can do contract, relax here. I'm going to spend about a minimum of 2 minutes in that point. But again, a really good stretch for post sessions. I don't want to stretch and rip that right before I go into a lifting session. I want to actually get that stuff afterwards when the muscles are already warm. So that's one thing to help with that position. The other thing you need to think about is if I do get to a point where I can achieve that position or I can achieve that range of motion that I want for the setup, I now need to strengthen those positions. It's one thing to have the range of motion. It's another thing to be able to actually hold and maintain. So you'll notice a lot of times with Olympic lifting programs, they'll do such things as bent rows, Pendlay rows. They'll do pause deadlifts right above the knee, things like that. Those aren't just for building upper back. That's also in a position for building the strength and actual stability in that hold. So for instance, if I'm doing a pause deadlift where I'm coming up above that knee to hold that position right before the second pull, don't just be focusing on your legs. Also be focusing on maintaining that hold of that good flat back. A couple of easy kind of cheap shot ways to build that stability as well. Cross chest band pulls are a really, really good way to do that. Hands on the outside of a relatively light band, elbows locked out. I'm bringing those shoulder blades back and down and I'm pulling in. And again, I'm not over exaggerating that motion. I'm just pulling to the chest, getting in the position I want, holding, right? So again, building not only the strength but the motor control to hold those positions is really, really important. So there's two things you can do to kind of help yourself work on getting into that setup position. Now let's start talking about the overhead. We've done a lot of videos on soft tissue stuff for beating up the delt, everything in the front, beating up through the tricep and the bicep, getting into back here with lacrosse balls and rumble rollers. Those are all great, so utilize those things. If you've seen anything from Kelley, Starret, or Jeff Alexander, great resources for that stuff as well. What we're going to talk about today is a banded stretch for overhead, again, really good for post-training, and then also some motor control stuff for the thoracic. So many people have seen this. This is your basic overhead external rotation stretch. If you'll notice, I like to refer to people as, or to tell people whether, to actually put the band in between their pointer and middle finger, all right? And so you guys get a little bit of a better view. I'm going to actually have Drew do his left arm, so actually switch out to the other side. By putting it into the pointer and middle finger, I find a lot of times with athletes, they're able to relax. If he comes here and puts it in between the thumb and the pointer finger, they have a tendency to grab onto the band, and I don't want them stretching and flexing through that position. So I like to refer people, I like to tell them, put it in between the pointer and middle finger. What he's doing is turning the palm up before he puts a stretch on. Now that he's got the palm facing up, elbow locked out, Drew's going to start to walk himself backwards. From this position, now he's going to dive that head or down, chest down, butt back. And what we're trying to create is this straight line, okay? So from this position, this mimics external rotation, good locked out position overhead, and a locked out elbow, good structure through here. Okay, again, a couple of things he can do. He can do contract relax, where he flexes back and pulls for about 5 seconds, and then relaxes for 10, applying a stretch further. The other thing he can do is he can actually reach his right hand up. He can take the palm of his right hand, place it over top of his thumb, and he can use that to actually corkscrew back and forth from internal rotation to external rotation. So again, minimum of 2 minutes, spend some time working with that afterwards. What we're going to talk about now, and the last thing we're going to refer to, if I get Drew, if I borrow you for 2 seconds there, boss, if we get Drew and Drew's trying to get into a really good overhead position, if you'll notice with Drew, he's got these positions. Very, very talented lifter. So he's got extension in the lumbar if he needs it. He's got extension in the thoracic if he needs it. A lot of lifters we find have an issue with thoracic extension, right? So what ends up happening is if he can't extend his thoracic out, if you'll notice, his hand ends up just in front of his head. Now, if he can't get that extension from the thoracic, his body is going to do one of two things. He's going to start going into cervical extension, and he's going to start going into lumbar extension to get into those spots. It's both very, very, very bad, okay? So what we need to do is regain this thoracic extension. So we're going to talk about a really, really easy way. It's a great warm-up. It's not only good for the mobility side of things because it will hit some soft tissue, but it's also really great from a motor control standpoint. What we're going to have Drew do is lay across a roller. It can be a rumble roller, it can be a soft roller, whatever you want. And we're getting him right essentially across the lower end of the scaps. And what he's going to do is his hips are flat on the ground, his feet are flat on the ground. And if you notice, he's bracing the back of his head with his arms. What we're trying to create or trying to encourage is thoracic extension and thoracic extension only. So if Drew cheats by doing lumbar extension, go ahead and lock your lower back out. Here, that's going against what we're going. That's cheating. We're achieving that extension by going lumbars instead here. If he reaches to touch the floor with just his neck, we're cheating by using cervical extension. The goal is for him to take a big breath in, and as he exhales, he's going to reach the top of his head towards the floor, but he's going to focus on keeping a flat neck, and he's going to focus on keeping a relatively flat back. So he reaches back as he exhales. He comes back up, takes a big breath in, and then exhales, pulling that full thoracic extension the whole entire way out. And time, go ahead and relax. For some people, you'll actually find some athletes, people that have like gymnastics background, people that are just relatively flexible, will actually be able to get enough thoracic extension to pull their head back and actually hit the floor. For most people, you're going to find out you can't. The goal is not so much how fast can I get my head to the floor. The goal is, am I learning about where that thoracic extension comes from, and can I encourage a little bit of better thoracic extension to get myself into better overhead positions that don't get with those huge locked out lower back and that big crooked neck up in the front. So a couple things to keep in mind. As you're doing that, think about that 2-hand rule, right? We look at thoracic extension really simple. If I have a hand on my hip and a hand on the bottom of my sternum, they shouldn't necessarily get too far apart or too far together. They should maintain a pretty good position, and I'm looking for just movement from that T-spine. So again, a couple of easy things to work with. You could work through 20, 30 breaths of that in a warm-up, a really, really good drill to get you guys moving. And it's a couple of things that are going to fix these setup positions and overhead positions. So any questions, anything like that, hit us up, columbusweightlifting.org, endeavordcf.com. We'll see you guys next time.